Welcome back, everybody. My name is Taylor Martin. This is the best Damn EDC, and we are at the shop today because we're doing something a little different, a little tutorial video for you guys. I've been asked a lot how to Spydieflick a knife. It looks cool, feels cool. It's probably my favorite way to open a knife, if I had a favorite way to open a knife. And I know a lot of you already know how to do it. This video is not for you. It's for the guys out there who don't know how to do it, and especially my in real life friends who ask me how or why. I can't answer the why, but I know the how. So that's what this video is about. How to Spydieflick a knife, or reverse flick, whatever you want to call it. And let's do the damn thing. So I think pretty obvious that this whole Spydieflick thing originated with Spyderco knives, and it really comes down to this giant thumb hole that makes it very, very easy to open the knife. But then somebody realized, hey, I can use my middle finger too, and you can flick it open. And the thing is, it just looks cool, it feels pretty natural. So I think really for me, the reason I want to Spydieflick a knife open is the ease of use too, right? It's not just something that's flashy. When I'm thumb flicking a knife, I have to then adjust my grip a lot more than if I Spydieflick it. I can just kind of choke up a little bit. And that's just kind of how it went for me, why I really wanted to learn how to Spydieflick. So there is some practical use to it, but for the most part, it's just something that looks really flashy. And it can be done with a wide array of knives, right? Something with a thumb stud, something with a little mill pocket, right? You can do it with that. There are even knives that don't have, this is a front flipper, and there's no stud or hole or pocket. And if you're really, I guess, wanting to, for whatever reason, you can still Spydieflick this knife. Not recommended, but you can do it. And there's a lot of different things to note about the different knives and how to Spydieflick each, but I'm going to give you a quick crash course on how it's done. It starts with really two things, holding the knife in a certain way and pushing with your finger in a certain way, in a certain direction. So holding it, the main things you want to know or keep in mind is that you want your index finger out of the path of the blade, and you want it kind of cradled in the palm of your hand like this right here, and use your thumb to stabilize and even put some downward pressure. Because if you're not holding tight and you flick this thing open, you might actually launch the knife, which is not good. So once you've got it cradled kind of like this, you rest it on your index finger, cradle in the palm of your hand, hold it in place, and even push down with your thumb. You just put your finger in that hole. So some people do it with the meat of their finger, some people do it with the nail, and it varies for me on different knives. For Spyderco knives, and especially with the PM2, I go nail in the hole, and you're pushing in the direction, like straight out from my finger, which is actually more of like a 45 degree from the pivot, and flick out. And you're just gonna build pressure until you feel it almost wanna break that detent, and then you just kind of flick. It's almost like thumping. That's really the action that you're doing, but instead of holding your middle finger with your thumb, you're doing it with the blade, and when you break that detent, it flies open. I think that's the best way to explain it. And it is different for every knife. Like this is a Tactile knife, Rockwall. This one you can actually push directly in line with the pivot, and the knife opens just fine. So similarly, you can do that when you're Spydieflicking it, or reverse flicking it, I guess would be the technical term for this. And then what I really like about some of these is that it doesn't even look like you're doing anything, because the detent is so perfectly tuned, you can just barely push and the knife flies out. It's like you don't even do anything. It happens so fast that it just looks like the knife is flying open on its own, which is really cool. It's just kind of a nice little touch. Another thing to note when you're dealing with a knife like this, something with an axis lock, you can't really rest the knife like this and still push, because that worked, but ideally it's not going to, because you're holding the axis with your finger, right? So what I tend to do with an axis lock knife is kind of rest my finger on the pivot screw so I know that I'm avoiding everything, and then flick. So same concept, it's just my index finger is not rested out, it's instead kind of cradling or resting on the pivot. And that's just to avoid the lock. Because if you're putting pressure on the lock, it is much harder to open the knife. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to do this with something with an axis lock. This is a knife that is pretty interesting. Similar to the Rockwall, you can just kind of push and it flies open. Very, very slow flick, but it just wants to, it's tuned so well that it just opens effortlessly as a Spydieflick. But if you use your nail on this thumb stud, you can really launch the knife open way harder, which is cool. You can kind of, vary how you're opening the knife. You can just hear the difference in how it opens versus. And this is another new knife for me, the Lukas-P from Wehr Knives. This one is very interesting because it wants to flick open so easily if you just kind of barely break that detent. It's on bearings. And that's another thing that's going to change how these knives operate. Obviously, something on bearings is going to fly open much faster, whereas with it on washers, it may not. But the Lukas-P, the reason I think this one's kind of interesting to me is just because when you break that detent very easily, it just wants to fly open, and it's very easy to do, right? It's effortless. But when you really want to flick this one hard, it gets very tough to break that detent, and this knife really flies open. It's just cool, something I noted when planning this video out. It's just a new knife to me, and I found that kind of interesting about it. But the real, true nemesis to the Spydieflick is the Umnumzaan. And I've said a bunch that the Umnumzaan cannot be Spydieflicked, but I'm wrong because I've even done it myself. I think I did it like 6 times one night. I can't do it anymore. I did it that one night and I've never been able to do it before or since then, but I know a lot of you have sent me videos of you doing it. It can be done. I mean, I can flick the thumb flick the Umnumzaan without issue. I mean, it opens just fine, but the Spydieflick on this knife is just, the detent is so strong and there's so little to grab because that thumb stud's very smooth, it's rounded, and you can barely get to the O-ring. I don't know how I did it that night. I cannot do it now. This thing is like, it's not my friend. I can't do it. Ugh. That's about all I got. But yeah, it's just different for every single knife. You just have to practice, play with different techniques, figure out what works for what knife. I can't even feel my middle finger because of the Umnumzaan. But this is, I think, about the smallest knife I can Spydieflick with any kind of like regularity. The HMC Transient Micro. But yeah, it's fun and it's addictive. It's something I just sit around and do all the time, which is, I'm sure, annoying to the people around me, but it's hard to stop once you figure it out. And especially on a knife like the Rockwall, this thing is just super snappy. The detent on it is perfect, and it just wants to fly open. So it's fun. I hope that helps. Let me know in the comments down below what you want to see a little tip on next, and we'll keep doing these little shop how-to videos. I think they're fun, something a little different, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in the next video.